Hello, friends out there in Facebook land. How are you doing today? I'm going a little earlier on this than I usually do because I got things going on this evening. I don't think I'll usually live stream this early, but here I am. Let me wait for you all to join, and well, I set a few things up. 1 second. Okay, so thanks for joining me. This is the fifth part in my series, Racism 101 for White Folk. All four of the back episodes are now archived on my YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and type in my name, Pete Perry, and it should come up. It should bring it up. Let me see, I'm just getting one more thing ready. That's what happens when you start using graphics and you don't have like an advanced software program, editing program to try and pull this all together. You're like flipping between windows and stuff. So I'm going to be working on I am going to be downloading a free software. Acronyms are OBS. And it's free. So anyways, so I want to give a shout out to my friend Jackie, I just mentioned, Jacqueline Lukman with Lukman Nation and Brick by Brick. Also want to give a shout out to Anoa J. Changa. Her program is called The Way. And also want to give a shout out to the Progressive Independent Party. I think they're going to be sharing this out too. The Progressive Independent Party is a coalition party, which means that they're willing to work with other progressive, left-leaning parties out there, whether it be the Green Party, the Socialist Party, whatever, and whoever has ballot status in whatever state, they'll help build capacity for that progressive party, as well as beginning to run their own candidates. I think they're closest to getting on the ballot, the PIP, they're closest to getting on ballot actually in Washington State right now, where they have a lot of folks and whatnot and energy on the ground. Let me see. Just trying to set one more thing up. So anyway, so my YouTube channel, and just messages on Facebook. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback for the series. I had one hateful message on one of the episodes on the YouTube channel, and I responded to the person. I said, I'm just going to leave your hateful, ignorant message up here because it kind of proves my points that I've had in the series about white denialism and just that the pervasiveness and the deep-seated like racism that's really out there. So I'm going to leave that negative one up there because it's just so hateful and ignorant. It just sort of just illustrates what's out there. What, people of color have to deal with every day of their lives, essentially. So let's see. I'm just trying to get one thing. That's all I'm asking for is one thing. Hold on a sec. And I see more people are joining us. So just to recap, like part one was sort of a reaction to an incident that happened at a national anti-war conference in Richmond about 2.5 or 3 weeks ago that I thought really needed to be addressed, and I couldn't remain silent on it because white silence is violence. I'm sorry if that's backwards. and it's a topic that needs to be addressed, is, inherent racism and white denialism within the so-called progressive movement. And so I'm still looking for this one thing, and it's distracting me, so I'm not doing such a hot job right now. Anyhow, I think I downloaded it onto my laptop, but when I looked in the different folders, I didn't see it, so that's why I'm looking for the image now. This chat that I'm in. Getting close to it. And now everything's slowed down. So anyways, I'll get around to that. So that was the first part, was talking about safe spaces and how the safe space was pretty much disrespected. Maybe not at the time when this white live streamer was in it, but immediately afterwards. And then her other friend, who's also a white live streamer, defended her, and then there was this whole wave of denial and accusing the black organizers of this black-only organizing space, which technically wasn't black-only, was meant for black organizers, because they invited white folk in there, including this one live streamer. But she was told she couldn't live stream from there. So that gave way to the first one to try and explain why there's safe spaces and why you should sort of like respect those spaces. If it's like a black organizing space and information sharing within the community and you're invited into it, you should show like a lot of respect to that and just be thankful that you were there. Part 2 was a history of racism in the United States from 1619, when the first slaves came into Virginia, to 1876, which is the ending of the Reconstruction period right after the Civil War. And then the part 3 was 1877 to 2014, which covered a lot about lynching, Jim Crow laws, and up to Michael Brown's murder in Ferguson, Missouri, and the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. So let's see. I literally cannot find this. I thought I emailed it to myself. Maybe I didn't. Jackie, hi. Can you send me that graphic that I had? It's in the Hubba Bubba chat. Anyhow, so it's this really good graphic that I wanted to have, but let me start off here. So I also wanted to start off with sharing some of my thoughts. I think there's a lot of folk in the what's now called by a lot of people the progressive movement. I'm not really calling it that. I'm calling it like a new left movement. And that's more encompassing. I think the progressive movement is just sort of a rebranding of a lot of disgruntled Bernie bros, or Bernie supporters. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Bernie bros. It's a little derogatory. Bernie supporters and folks that are looking for something to do after the election. And Bernie Sanders obviously lost the election. Whether that was fair or not, I'm not going to get into that conversation. I think he could have had more name recognition. I'll just throw that out there. And if the election had lasted 3 or 4 months longer, he certainly would have been the nominee. And people that have rebranded themselves progressive now that were traditionally considered liberal. But a lot of people, liberal gained a lot of negative baggage in the 80s and 90s, mainly from Republicans that were able to frame the conversation a lot of ways. So people try to get away from liberal and they just call themselves progressive now. So others of us, progressive and liberal, don't mean the same thing. But also within this progressive movement, I don't think it's often incorporated, say, anarchists or communists. But when I use the term left movement, yes, it does include those folks as well. So without further ado, let's get started here. Here we go. Well, that didn't work. So now I'm getting weird, difficult things too. Let's see. It's loading. So yeah, I really should get that software up and running. So it's loading, whatever this is. I know what it is, but it's like not there. Okay, I'm sorry about this. I think I just have like too many windows open at once. Problem. So anyway, the topics today are intersectionality, environmental racism, and economic racism. And this first video sort of gives you a look at the severe problems with the municipal water in a black majority town. And it's not Flint, Michigan. So you often hear about Flint, Michigan, but I've heard that there's more than 150 other municipalities that don't have basically don't have drinkable water from their municipal water source. Yeah, I have too many windows open, so I'm going to start shutting my windows down and try again, I guess. So anyways, hope everyone's doing well out there. Sorry I'm having so many problems here. I like to get stuff rolling, and when it just freezes up on me, I don't know what to do. So that was my plan, to share that video, and maybe it's still going to come up. Here we go. Maybe. Pressing play. Wow, okay, it doesn't want to cooperate. Well, that's a total frickin' bummer. So, I'm trying to like do this. I think it's just moving really slow. I hope it doesn't like buffer like crazy. No, it's just frozen. So anyway, hope everyone's well out there in Facebook land. going to try and relaunch this actually and shut another couple windows down. So here we go, we're going to try again. I mean, I hope people have found this series useful. This is the worst technical difficulties I've come across, but this laptop's about 10 years old. So here we go. Try again. So, anyways, I'm gonna skip that for now. Sorry. So, anyways, environmental racism and economic racism, what I want to talk about today, as well as, define the term intersectionality. So, in recent years, there was a Yale University study that found that non-whites, non-Hispanic whites had the lowest exposure rates for 11 of the 14 pollutants monitored in their study. Meanwhile, Hispanics had the highest exposure rates for 10 out of the 14 pollutants, and African Americans had higher exposure rates than whites, 13 out of the 14 pollutants. Some of these pollutants studied have been connected to asthma, cardiovascular issues, lung disease, and cancer. And a report by the Center for Effective Government in the last couple of years found that people of color are nearly twice as likely as white residents to live within what's called a fence line zone of an industrial facility that's less than 2 miles from the actual facility. These facilities could contribute to air pollution, safety issues, and health concerns. And a study from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, determined that 11.2% of African American children, 4.0% of Mexican American children, and only 2.3% of white children are poisoned by lead. Lead poisoning can result in a wide range of health problems such as anemia, seizures, and brain development issues. And that's some of what we're seeing in Flint, but I also mentioned approximately about 150 other municipalities in the U.S. that have substandard drinking water. So again, 11.2% of African American children versus only 2.3% of white children are poisoned by lead. And then there was another statistic that was pretty much an eye-opener too. And this is often the thing with these industrial sites or sites they know are going to have severe health impacts from environmental degradation, pollution, and waste, and so forth. There was a report titled Toxic Waste and Race at 20. So it collected and reviewed data over a 20-year time period and found that more than half of the people who live within that fence line, less than 2 miles from the toxic waste facilities in the United States, are people of color. So those municipalities I was saying, like Flint, that don't have drinkable water, are the vast majority of them actually have majority black or at least majority non-white people of color populations. So there you have it. I mean, it's pretty obvious that there's some significant environmental racism going on currently in this country. And, Flint gets a lot of attention, but places like St. Joseph, Louisiana don't get as much attention. So the media likes to pick that one place and just focus all its energy on it. But like I said, there's all these other places out there that are effectively being destroyed. So let me check one thing here. Wow, like everything's frozen up on me now. So anyways, that's the life when you have a really old laptop. So I'm going to just try and relaunch everything then, I guess. Maybe that'll work. So there's also another town in Louisiana that has a really interesting history. There's a town called Morrisville, Louisiana, that was founded by free slaves or ex-slaves. Morrisville, Louisiana. A handful of free black men and women, led by an ex-slave named Jack Moss, settled along the rich, biodiverse region of southwest Louisiana in the late 1800s and created the town Mossville. I'm sorry, I said Morrisville. Mossville. So it was named after Jack Mass, this ex-slave. Moss, this ex-slave. Mossville covered about 5.4 square miles in its heyday. Mossville boasted of being a home to 3,000 families. Today, there are a mere 310 families left, and that's because Mossville has been destroyed by petrochemical industries such as polyvinyl chloride factories, coal-fired power plants, and large oil refineries, according to its residents. One resident says, "We were happy in Mossville, where we could escape the hostilities of racism," explained Dorothy Felix, 74. "This was our little town. It was the place to be, the way life should be. Families were families, and we all shared with everyone," as Felix told the local newspaper. So, yeah, Mossville was like this thriving drunk because the environmental degradation that it was subjected to. Mossville is the poster child for environmental racism and environmental injustice. That's what makes it so unique, argues Dr. Robert Bullard, Ph.D. Dean of the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas. What is happening in Mossville is so egregious, we had to take the issue before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland. Dr. Bullard, who is a world-renowned advocate for communities affected by environmental injustices, told the local newspaper. So yeah, there's many stories like Mossville or St. Joseph. They just happen to be in Louisiana. So again, I think also with the history of severe racism, segregation, and various other Jim Crow laws, the South is probably some of the southern towns suffer the greatest. And, when they build these, like in D.C. too, they were going to build this newest incinerator, and they were going to build it in almost all black neighborhood, of course. And so incinerators give off these toxic fumes that pollute the environment and have been known to cause asthma, other respiratory ailments. They always build those in predominantly black neighborhoods, or near predominantly, overwhelmingly majority black towns. Those things happen. Nuclear waste sites, incinerators, what have you. So I closed my browser and I'm reopening it. So let's see if I can get to something else here. So thanks for joining me. And I also want to give a shout out to the activists that are in Flint that are working hard to address some of the issues there. And I think that's great. I just hope that they're letting the residents of Flint, particularly people of color, take lead positions and primary speaking roles in that activism that's continuing in Flint, and that the white activists that are coming into town, I'm sure they're doing good work. I just hope they don't take leading roles and replace the residents that have lived there for a long time now and have suffered a lot of the consequences of basically the poisoned water of Flint. So let me see. And to be honest, I'm not as greatly prepared as I usually am for this too. It's because I wanted to draw on a lot of different sources, I think. Here, I'm going to try one more time. So, I swear I will give up on this video if it doesn't work this time. Voila.
You can't wash clothes in this. You can't, really, you don't.
Yeah, it's buffering. So I enlarged it, and then all of a sudden it decided to buffer. So let's see.
Bathe in it. You can't drink it. You can't cook with it. About the only thing it's good for is flushing the toilet. There's a 50-50 shot that the water might come through clear, or it might come through brown. Absolutely unreal to me that in 2016, in the most powerful country in the world, we're allowing an entire generation to grow up not knowing what clean water is.
So there we have it. So that's now this, which does some really great little short videos to keep people informed on crucial issues happening. So yeah, and then I wanted to talk about intersectionality, and that's a phrase that's bandied about a lot, used by a lot of different activists. Like, what is intersectionality? It's basically different groups working on issues that have that mean a lot to all those various groups or stakeholders, I guess you could say, in that particular matter or problem that's affecting their communities. So let's see. So yeah, people talk about intersectionality and that we need to focus on it and so forth and so on. So here we go. This should be a pretty good definition. So let me see. Intersectionality is a term coined by American civil rights advocate Kimberly Williams Crenshaw to describe overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Intersectionality is the idea that multiple identities intersect to create a whole that is different from the component identities. These identities that can intersect include gender, race, social class, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, religion, age, mental disability, mental illness, and physical illness, as well as other forms of identity. These aspects of identity are not unitary, mutually exclusive entities, but rather reciprocally constructing phenomena. So last time I talked about how identity politics is not really a thing in reality. It's like a construct, or it explains something or explains a certain pattern. So, I mean, like I said before, I understand what identity politics is. I understand what intersectionality is. But I think it's more a form of organizing than actual politics. Like intersectionality is a pattern of recognizing oppression that's shared amongst different groups, say Latinos and Black folks and recent Muslim immigrants are all targeted and surveyed by law enforcement so thoroughly that their concerns come together and they can fight that oppression, hopefully together, unified. In last episode, the one right before this, I talked about what it means to be a white ally or accomplice being used a lot more now. And as white folk, we can help amplify those voices in those intersectionality campaigns, or campaigns that are intersectional in nature. So, yeah, another part about this is intersectionality proposes that all aspects of one's identity need to be examined as simultaneously interacting with each other and affecting one's privilege and perception in society. So, I'm a white, gay male. Those are like three different identities. It's what I'm concerned about. Some people would say, yeah, what you're talking about, Pete, is identity politics. I don't think so, because I'm also a Green Party member, and I've been, I also identify as socialist anarchist, and those are more typical political, philosophical terms and descriptors. So, and that's more through a political avenue or ideology. Socialist anarchist or being a Green Party member is more along that than a set identity. So it's to say that there's identity politics means, okay, we're going to go out and recruit so-and-so to run for an office because they fit X, Y, and Z category. It's not planned out or orchestrated in any way like that. That's why I say identity politics don't really exist. It's like an artificial construct to explain patterns of behavior or participation in society. But I don't think it's really a thing in and of itself. So, like I was saying, environmental racism affects not only Black communities, but it also affects brown communities. There's areas along the border that have a lot of toxic waste dumps. There's Navajo Nation, which straddles, I was reading about this, New Mexico and Arizona. They've been exposed to toxic waste dumps, chemical, radiological material dumped in Navajo Nation or right next to Navajo Nation. So they have severe, the last 20 or 30 years has been recorded severe health problems from that. So these different communities, they can come together to fight environmental racism, I believe. Also, environmental racism also extends to the rapidly warming up of our planet, global climate change. And at the recent climate march here in DC, there was the Frontline People's contingent, and me and my friends began the march with them. They had some really cool props, really nice signs and banners. And I didn't connect with my Catholic worker friends, but they were trying to get over to my Catholic worker friends from Norfolk. And Norfolk is one of the low-lying areas that is considered a frontline community in the global climate change. And so Norfolk, Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach, it's all sort of like in this triangle or quad. I think Chesapeake would be the fourth. So it'd be like a quad urban area, is all predominantly Black. And it's all in this low-lying area that would be impacted first. And of course, you have the indigenous folks of the, I think the Marshall Islands and the, might start with an S, another series of islands in the South Pacific are already being directly impacted by rising sea levels. That is the natural outcome of global climate change, the gradual warming up of our environment and the melting of the polar ice caps. So I see that as also another form of environmental racism. I think I know where I kept that graphic, actually. So I wanted to talk about economic racism, which is pretty obvious for most folks, but I guess there's still some folks as I was saying before, the progressive movement, or what I call the new left movement, a lot of it is composed now of millennials, or just folks that have not been really activated. And so I guess that's what's really was great about Bernie's campaign, was it activated so many people, encouraged so many people to get out in the streets and get involved at a level they had never been involved in before. He lit the fire under a lot of people's asses, to be honest. So let me see. I'm going to pull up some more. I think I know where I kept that graphic, actually. Because this one's an eye-opener. Yeah, again, here we are. So let me find that. So yeah, I remember in DC, 3 or 4 years ago, the unemployment rate was really low for the white population. It was pretty low for, in Obama's second term. The unemployment rate in all cities was lowering, and it was pretty low, the average overall. But then you look specifically at the black population, and I think in DC 3 or 4 years ago it was about 5% was the average for the total metropolitan area of Washington, D.C. So that includes a little bit of Virginia, Maryland inside the Beltway, as well as the city, was about hovering around 4.5 or 5%. And then you looked at the predominantly black areas, especially east of the Anacostia River, Anacostia, Deanwood, those predominant black areas, the unemployment rate was much higher, between 25%. And then they looked at young black men between 18 and 29, and it was getting up to about 30%. It stayed around 30% for several years. I still think it's pretty high among young black men. So you have discrimination in hiring practices. And then the graphic I was looking for that's still not coming up was just the overall wage gap between whites and Hispanics and the black community. So let's see. No, it wasn't in the folder I thought it was in. So it was a large gap, and it was the numbers were actually drawn from the U.S. Census Bureau, and I think the average there, I found it, thank goodness. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this for a little while. I'm going to pull it up, and it's just good to have it to refer to as I talk about it. So this was done when the U.S. Census Bureau did its last census, 2010, and I think published it and studied it more in 2011. So every 10 years, the U.S. Census Bureau does a census. So it's still trying to open it up, moving really slow. Here we are. And it should populate. So anyway, so it's a big gap. I think the average, I know for DC, the average income DC is a very wealthy city overall, but huge disparities. I think the average income for white family in DC is around 100,000, maybe a little more than 100,000 annual income. And for black families, it's less than half of that. And DC has this huge changing demographic because of gentrification, rising taxes, and so forth have pushed historical Washingtonian black families that have been here for generations and generations, move them out of the city, usually to the east, further out into Prince George's County. So you see a lot of that. So this image still doesn't want to come up. So people sort of question when you have statistics and whatnot, so I wanted to be sure that I was using accurate statistics. So like I said, this one came from the U.S. Census Bureau. I saw it for a split second, then it went away. So, I mean, what are folks' thoughts about not only about environmental racism and economic racism, but this series in general? So let me give me some comments, and maybe I can answer some questions or clarify something that I discussed. So let's see. I'm not seeing any comments right now. I don't know if I have this on a weird setting or what. And so I was reading an article too that probably the hardest working demographic, and yet the lowest paid demographic has been black women for decades and decades. They work the longest hours, multiple jobs often, and black women are paid the lowest. They're paid lower than their female counterparts, and this is where intersectionality sort of works too. They are black and women, obviously, so they get paid less than their white populated, there's the image, their white female counterparts, and then white females get paid less than white males. I think it's still about 29 or 30 cents less per dollar from white men to white women, and then black women are lower down on the economic totem pole than that. So, I mean, these are historic, ongoing injustices, and it's not just history. We're talking about the here and now. Here's the graphic. So, you have Latino families, black families, and white families. And there you have it. And that's the size of the wealth gap in the gray. So this is the U.S. Census Bureau. They call it the Survey of Income of Program Participation, SIP, but it's conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau every 10 years when they do the census. They calculate these numbers. So white families make a lot of money. So if you're white in America, you're doing pretty well. If your white family is doing pretty well, can afford a couple cars, maybe 3 cars, nice comfortable house, can send your kids probably to a private college, even though that's getting pretty damn expensive. But then if you're a Latino family, you make $102,798 less than the white family. And if you're a black family in America, you earn $104,033 less per year than the white family. So that's the size of the racial gap in the U.S. So I just wanted folks to look at that. I'm sorry it took me so long to pull it up. And then I already discussed unemployment rates, how it's often very high. In D.C., it's always been the highest amongst, like I said, young black men. Also, when you get out of jail, it's really hard for what they call them returning citizens. People that get out of jail have done their time. It's very hard for them to get employment. I think they did pass the ban the box in D.C. I don't know if it's gone into effect. The ban the box refers to on employment applications, they ask a question: have you ever been convicted of a crime, or have you ever been convicted of a felony? I think maybe they're still allowed to ask if there's a felony, but they can't ask about any crime whatsoever or any arrest. I've applied for a few jobs who asked me about previous arrests, and being the nonviolent direct activist I am, I always had to say yes, and then they usually gave you a little spot for an explanation, but not always. Sometimes I couldn't explain what the hell I was being arrested for. Most times, though, it was convictions, list convictions. But now places are doing away with requiring you to report misdemeanor convictions and only requesting felonies. But in D.C., to get back to the point about young black men and why the unemployment rate is so high amongst them, directly related to that is that at any given time in D.C., 1 in 5 of the young black men of Washington, D.C. are incarcerated. I'll repeat that to you again. At any given time in Washington, D.C., 1 in 5 of the young black males, 18 to 29, are being incarcerated. That's huge. That's a huge chunk of the population. So, anyways, moving forward, a lot of folks want to talk about classism. As I was saying before, to only talk about classism, you strip it down to a point that it's almost meaningless. Because when you talk about classism, there's all these other distinctions. And again, this intersectionality, the concept of intersectionality. There's the wage gap, gender wage gap. There's the racial wage gap that's huge, which I just showed you right here. So when you talk about classism, and say, well, you're being divisive by talking about racism and systems of white supremacy, even though our whole nation was founded on white supremacy. And in my opinion, if you're a progressive, you need to accept that and need to fight against the system of white supremacy, which is the most virulent form of injustice in modern Western society. It is. And if we're truly progressive or left movement, we can't talk about classism, the classist oppression of the working guy, which is often this white, tough, macho union guy. You have to talk about classism in an intersectional manner. Why are there huge wage gaps? Why is the average American black family earning $104,033 less a year than the white family? Why are cities like Washington, D.C. so extremely segregated that us white folk up in most parts of Northwest are so far removed from the black community way over on the east side? Like other states too, cities too, like Louisiana, Louisiana, not Louisiana, sorry, St. Louis. So St. Louis, East St. Louis is like predominantly black, and the western part and the northern western suburbs are all predominantly white. We have segregation. We don't have redlining of communities anymore, but we continue to have segregation in this country. As progressives, as the left movement of the 20 teens, we need to be fighting against that. And we need to support our black comrades in this struggle, period. End of story. So moving forward, I think we can come together. We recognize how intersectionality plays in issues such as environmentalism, classism, why there's huge income disparities. And we're not being divisive. We're actually being aware. When we talk about these topics, we're actually being aware and talking about reality. Like I said before, I'm going to talk about matters, important matters, often of life and death. Why communities are being destroyed by poisonous water, toxic waste dumps. That's happening. That's reality. I'm not being divisive. I'm part of the left movement, and so what we're doing is we're fighting against injustices, the most virulent form being white supremacy. So I'll sign off here. This is part 5. Part 6 will be, I'm thinking of titling it White Fragility and Smashing White Supremacy. So that will be the last part of this 6-part series. So I'll be uploading this tonight to my YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube, type in Pete Perry, and you should find it there. Sorry I had so many technical difficulties with this one. I'm going to sign off with a quote from Indigenous Australian activist and visual artist Lila Watson. And so let me pull up that quote. Wow, my laptop is like not having a good day today. So this quote ties into the theme of intersectionality and why environmental racism and economic racism affects all of us. It affects all of us to one degree or another. That's my dog yawning in the background. This has just been a crazy part of this series. So Lila Watson, like I said, she's Aboriginal, Indigenous Australian activist and great visual artist, actually. And her quote basically is about, don't come to me seeing me as a charity case that you feel called to help. Come to me and be part of this movement, this struggle together, because your liberation is tied up in my liberation. And like I said, environmental racism, economic racism all affects us in one way or another. We're all victims of global climate change. I mean, that's happening to us as humanity. We're all in this together. You know, the burgeoning plutocracy in this country. You know, the income disparity between the 1/10 and 1% that controls the levers of power and the rest of us is impacting all of us. Those on the front line are my black brothers and black sisters. They've been affected and impacted, in some cases literally destroyed, by the system of white supremacy. So the Lila Watson quote, here it is. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. She's an activist, academic, and visual artist from Australia, an Indigenous woman. So keep an eye on Facebook. Check out my group, Democracy Now! On Facebook. Check out Progressive Independent Party on Facebook, as I said. They're a coalition left-leaning third party that's starting. That's coalition, meaning they will work with other left-leaning parties out there. And also check out Anoa J. Chenga of The Way and Jacqueline Lukeman of Lukeman Nation. Thank you, and till next time, have a good night.